Oh, hey there. Are you a young adult, 50 and older? Yes, 50 and older. 50 is the new 30. Maybe your parents, maybe your aunties, maybe your neighbor who still thinks TikTok is a type of breath mint. Well, you or someone you love might now be considered for a life-saving vaccine, an RSV vaccine. Welcome to the Chan Checkup. If you're thinking what even is RSV, you're probably not the only one. RSV stands for respiratory syncytial virus. It's a respiratory infection that we used to mainly worry about in babies and young kids. It gives cold-like symptoms and can get really nasty for certain groups, especially older adults. Over time, we found RSV was becoming a bigger problem in the older population more than we expected. So about 2 or 3 years ago, we introduced an RSV vaccine. At first, the recommendation was for patients 60 and older and for pregnant individuals in their third trimester. Later on, studies showed that people 75 years and older had an especially high risk of severe RSV infections. So for the first time in my career, we actually narrowed the vaccine recommendation. Instead of vaccinating everyone 60 and older, we got more specific. We only vaccinated patients 75 and older, or 60 and older if you have at least one chronic condition like congestive heart failure that puts you at a high risk. And yes, narrowing recommendations is rare. Usually at the pharmacy, it feels a lot like an Oprah episode, only with more band-aids and less screaming, or more screaming in some cases. But anyway, for example, when we looked at the data, people with congestive heart failure were either 8 to 14 times more likely to get severe RSV depending on which page of the data you looked at. Either way too high for comfort. Now here's the big news. The CDC is proposing that we shift the high-risk group again from 60 down to 50 years old. And that's a huge move. When we drop the age like that, the eligible population balloons. In this case, about 31% of adults over 50 could now be considered for the RSV vaccine. That's being conservative. So should you or your parents run out and get it? Well, let's break down how the CDC thinks through this stuff. They considered public health impact. Is this a big enough deal? They consider risks versus benefits. Are the side effects worse than the protection? They consider technical issues. Is it feasible to roll out, or are vaccine schedules going to get super confusing? The short answer is it's complicated. The longer answer, let's keep going. Now let's nerd out with some numbers. Here's a graphical look at the hospitalization rates for RSV in adults. For adults 75 and older, hospitalization rates skyrockets. That's no surprise. For adults 60 to 74, risk is lower. But if you have just one chronic disease like heart disease or diabetes, your risk shoots right back up. The new 50 to 59 group being considered, their risk is naturally lower. Younger equals sturdier, generally speaking, but it's still significant. And if you're wondering why there's a weird gap in the data around 2020 to 2021, COVID happened. Massive quarantines, respiratory diseases took a long vacation. Maybe if we all lived on Zoom or FaceTime forever, we could beat half of the world's infections. Another key point is adults 50 to 59, they have similar incidence of disease and only slightly lower rates of chronic diseases compared to those 60 and older. It's the same deal. Cardiovascular disease, diabetes, immune-compromising conditions, higher BMIs. And if you're 50 and older and you have 2 chronic diseases, you could be at a higher risk than a healthy 75-year-old. Now, real talk, I would have loved to see better data here. When I dug into the source, they lumped together 50 to 64-year-olds in one big group. I even went to the source of the source, the CDC surveillance database called RSVNet, and I didn't really find a difference. They seemingly had to extrapolate the 50 to 59 numbers, which is never ideal. Plus, testing for RSV back in the day wasn't as good, so a lot of the older data that we had to be standardized or massaged to make it fair. It's like comparing a grainy black and white to a 4K Ultra HD TV. But despite the imperfections, the overall trend is pretty clear. Older plus chronic conditions equals higher risk of severe RSV. And what about side effects? What are the risks? When the RSV vaccine first rolled out, serious side effects were rare, but later they did find a small risk of Guillain-Barré syndrome. 9 cases per million with one vaccine, 6 cases per million with the other. About as rare as seeing a unicorn, but still something to keep on the radar. Definitely not a unicorn anyone would want to ever see. And yes, expanding the eligible group to younger folks could slightly increase the number of GBS cases. That's part of the cost-benefit analysis. And then we consider boosters. And this is a question I get a lot at the pharmacy. Is this a one-and-done shot? Right now, we don't know for sure, but for now it's one and done. But my gut tells me that down the line, they'll probably recommend booster doses, especially if they keep lowering the age threshold, and effectiveness of the vaccine does wane over time. So what do I think? I think the benefits outweigh the risks significantly. I think this is a very low-risk move to vaccinate more individuals. So much so that they'll be discussing the 18 to 49 group in June, according to the CDC slide deck. The bigger question for me isn't about safety. It's about whether it's impactful enough to go through all the trouble of promoting this age group for vaccination. And that part is honestly pretty subjective. Now, you might be wondering, this meeting by the Advisory Committee of Immunization Practices was a couple weeks ago. Why hasn't it officially happened yet? Well, there's still a few hoops to jump through. The recommendation needs to be approved by the head of the CDC and also by the Department of Health and Human Services. And that's where things get a little complicated. The current head of the CDC is new, and her nomination hasn't been fully finalized yet. And the Secretary of Health and Human Services is, of course, RFK Jr., a known vaccine skeptic. So who knows what's going to happen, really? We might be waiting a little while, or a long while, or forever. Your guess is as good as mine. And that's it for the checkup for today. Thanks for watching. If you like, don't forget to click all the buttons, smash the likes, feed the algorithm gods. You know the drill. Stay safe, stay informed, because while love is contagious, unfortunately so is RSV. See you next time.